Hello and welcome to a special edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Monday, July 11th. Today we're going to have a discussion with the three candidates who are running in the Democratic Party primary for the Bennington County Sheriff. There are no candidates running in the Republican primary, so barring some amazingly successful write-in campaign, one of these three gentlemen here will be the next sheriff in Bennington County. It's highly likely that the winner, therefore, will be decided in the August 9th primary, and he will be replacing the outgoing incumbent, Sheriff Chad Schmidt, who is not running for re-election after 13 years in office. The three candidates we have with us today are Lieutenant Joel Howard, who's a member of the County Sheriff's Department, James Gully Jr., and Bo Alexander. Mr. Gully and Mr. Alexander were both candidates 4 years ago during the previous election, which was won by Sheriff Schmidt. Gentlemen, welcome back to the News Project. Great to have you all with us today, and thank you for making the time for this discussion and conversation. I thought we could start by just going around the table and having each of you sort of introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your careers, your background, and why it is that you're running for the post of Bennington County Sheriff. For lack of any better method, I thought we could start alphabetically, and therefore, Mr. Alexander, we'll look to you to get us started. Tell us why you decided to run and what brought you to this point.
Well, first, I would like to thank you for having us here today, and I appreciate you gentlemen joining.
Yes, thank you.
This is very healthy, and I think it's important for the campaign. And thanks to the community members out there that are watching when this is available to the public. So my name is Bo Alexander, and I recently worked as the head of safety and security at the hospital here locally in Bennington. Prior to that, when I worked closely with law enforcement in Bennington County, I worked for Bennington Probation and Parole. And one of the main reasons why I decided to run in 2018, and including this year, 2020, is because I've seen some of the things in our community that I wasn't really happy with. So I was watching a President Obama special, and he said, quote, "If you don't like what you see going on in your neighborhood, get a petition, get signatures, get on the ballot, and make a change."
All right. Mr. Gully, what brings you to the table here?
Again, thank you for the time, and thank you, gentlemen. Well, my professional experience goes back 20 years, and as a Bennington police officer, I was hired as a patrolman, and I worked up through the ranks from patrolman into mid-level administration, as well as working as a detective, working diligently with the illicit drug unit. And from there, I had a brief moment of working also with the Vermont State Police Narcotics Investigation Unit, otherwise known as the Drug Task Force. So I've worked with numerous federal agencies, the FBI, the ATF, DEA, for example, when seeking out very, very, very violent crime and very, very, very dangerous drugs, as well as firearms, which I then subsequently transferred into the Manchester Police Department when I was also hired as an educator through the Vermont Southwest Tech, our technical county school district. So with that, my education also is also extensive. I have an undergraduate degree in criminal justice through Castleton University, excuse me. A master's of public administration through Norwich University, as well as I'm just 6 credits shy of a second master's degree. So I have a total of 30 extra graduate level courses. So in order to share the table, I'll stop talking now and let Joel go from there.
Okay, Lieutenant Howard.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. So I started my law enforcement career back in 2005 as the Town of Pownell Constable, where I was elected. After being appointed, I stayed there for a while, was offered a better job through the Sheriff's Department, transferred into the Sheriff's Department, and I started working my way up through the ranks, went through the full-time academy, graduated from there, again started working my way. I've held the positions of sergeant, staff sergeant, and now currently lieutenant, K-9 officer through the department. Much like James, I've had lots of time in drug interdiction, drug trafficking, drug training. I'm one of the few in the state that have a federal certification for commercial motor vehicle law enforcement. I have my college degree, and I have 17 years of experience in the department and the inner working of the department.
Okay, well, great. That's great background information, I'm sure, for many of our viewers here. Lieutenant Howard, let me stay with you, since I think you'd be able to explain this to our viewers. How does the county sheriff's department work? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about how it's set up. It's sort of different from a typical municipal police department or the state police. There are a couple of assignments that you folks have. You transport people from prisons to courts, you serve eviction papers, and for that you receive public funding. But you also provide a lot of other services as well, maybe traffic control or courthouse security, or you have law enforcement contracts with towns, different towns that don't have their own police departments, like for instance right here in Sunderland where we are now. So I guess I just wondered, how does that all work? These are through individual contracts, I guess.
So, as you said, we are paid by the state to do a certain number of things, and one of them is to transport prisoners and mental health patients to and from. The other is to serve civil paperwork. Other than that, the money that we create is through grants and contracts, mostly through contracts, because unfortunately we're not the primary law enforcement agency, so we don't qualify for a lot of those grants that are out there for police officers. So we have grant time, not grant time, we have town contracts, and we have contracts with like Green Mountain Power. We'll go up to the hospitals to do security up there as well. Security details, escorts of wide loads from one state through the other, across all over Vermont, really, depending on size and width and weight. And that's we have a certain price that we bill for that, and that's how we produce money to buy new equipment and to pay our guys.
Okay. Mr. Gully and Mr. Alexander, I just wondered, do you think the way that's set up is the best possible system, or is there some improvements that might be made?
Well,
Jim, move over to you.
Usually when I'm out on the campaign trail, there are numerous people that ask that question: what is the importance of the sheriff's department, and or how is it funded, etc. But in order to establish the current trends and or financials of the sheriff's department, you have to go back in time, and you have to truly understand what the sheriff's department is and where it came from. So hundreds of years ago, the sheriff's department was a derivative of the Shire Reeve, okay? And with that being said, is that the Shire Reeve would go out and they would collect taxes for whomever was in control. So in particular, we're talking back in the 1600s, they would go out and they'd be collecting taxes for whoever's in charge of the lords, the earls, etc. Whereas in those times, the sheriff was paid a percentage of those taxes that were allocated and then handed forth to whomever they worked for. Whereas today, there have been statutorily changes in our Vermont state statute, whereas the sheriff's department has really a limited function. One, the sheriff technically serves writs or formal court documents. Two, they're in charge of transportation, like Joel had mentioned, of people who are being transferred from the courts to the correctional facility and back again and so on. And I explain this further in my video through on my Facebook page and YouTube page. However, everything else that has been acquired pertaining to courtroom security, transportation escorts, town contracts, those are all extras. Those are not required by the state. And that is where you also will tap into that 5% administrative fee that the sheriff, per state law, is allowed to keep. Now, I know we're going to discuss about that in a short period of time, but there's a lot of there's an extensive amount of knowledge and or a lack of understanding. Is because really, who's supposed to be educating the people about that? Are they themselves supposed to go online and look that up, or are we supposed to be educating the people? And that's part of my plan. I'll explain further.
Okay.
As far as, I mean, that was a great history lesson.
Hey,
and I
thanks.
didn't know about any of that, but yes. But I think, you know, where we're focused at is right now, what's happening right now, what hasn't been done in the past XYZ amount of years. The contracts are important. They're a very important part, because if you didn't have that part, the sheriff's department would be, you could have 3 people running the sheriff's department. So the contracts are important, but that 5%, like, as I know we're going to talk about again, is that's where I have a problem, where the 5% goes into the sheriff's pocket. The sheriff's department shouldn't be a money-making opportunity for the sheriff. However, he's entitled to a salary, but I think we need to address that first and foremost and get more contracts with the sheriff's department to build it. And that may qualify us for more federal grants moving down the road.
So, James, let me go to you then. Do you think it would be possible to shift the funding entirely to the public purse? I mean, I guess not. It sounds like from what I'm hearing is that in order to do the traffic control and the courtroom security and the other tasks that come your way, that would require a large increase in state spending to make that happen if it was to be funded entirely right out of the state treasury.
So if you look at the funding aspect of our sheriff's department, the Bennington County Sheriff's Department, there are numerous different funds, as we've just mentioned. State funds, county funds, federal and state grants, contracts, and other funds are liquid assets that the sheriff's department has at its disposal. But the hard part with that is that the county only provides approximately $400,000 towards a $1.8 million operational expense, whereas approximately $1.5 million of that fund comes from contracts. Now, if we swipe that entirely from the board, and I think the two here would agree with me, that by striking that off the board, look at the weight you're pushing onto the taxpayer. Now, there are 14 sheriffs in our state. So that means that there's going to be a considerable increase per the tax base in our community. Now, last time I checked, I haven't seen a lot of revenue coming into our communities, especially in the town of Bennington and so on. So that would be hard for people, because that's one more payment that they have to make. That really, can they? So with that being said, I do believe that if managed properly, that the funding source of the sheriff's department can be done the way it stands now. And that's a reason why I want to get my agency, if I'm elected, the sheriff's department, accredited so that it opens the doorways to federal and state grants that are currently otherwise closed, because they're not meeting that quality standard.
Okay. Bo and Joel, do you want to comment in any way on that? Is it not fiscally possible, I guess, to operate without the current system of contracts with various entities?
I don't think it's I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't see it that it is, and I don't think it's responsible to do that.
Okay.
I think the sheriff's department plays could play an extremely helpful role in our community. On a campaign trail, as Gully talked about earlier, James, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
I get asked a lot, how come I see a deputy driving up Route 7 and there's people driving 80 miles an hour and they're not being stopped? Why are they not in town walking, doing foot patrols? And I think that's important, not only for the deputies, but important for the sheriff. And that's why I feel like it's extremely important for the sheriff to be visible inside the community in which he's elected and available to his constituents and everybody in the community.
Did you want to add anything to that, Lieutenant Howard? Or?
Well, he brought up several different points. First and foremost, I think that the way that the sheriff department's funded now is probably the only way without an act of Congress or legislative movement. And that, like James says, that's going to create a lot of taxpayer revenue that's going to be very hard for people to swallow. As far as some of the other things, I think we'll discuss that as we go further on. But I don't see any other way for it to run at this time. I mean, I would personally, if elected, I would love someone to come in and say, here's your budget, here's your line items, and run with a budget like that. That would be great. Unfortunately, that's not how it's done.
Right.
Okay. Well, then, what about this 5% return that the sheriff gets? That you mentioned earlier. Explain to me how that works. So, if you have a contract with a particular town and I'm going to keep the math simple for myself here, and it was like $100 to provide law enforcement or traffic control for a particular town. That meant $5 of that goes basically as salary to the sheriff. Is that how it works?
Well, the sheriff couldn't make, they would establish where that money would go, but it's at their discretion per law. I guess that's me going, so I can go.
Well-
I think with all three of us here on the same ticket, and all of us saying that 5% should not be going to the sheriff, but it should be invested into the department and into the community, it's going to change a lot throughout the state, because every other sheriff's department does it. And I know when I ran in 2018, I got some negative feedback on having that. And I don't know if James received any, I can't speak for him, but about giving that money back to the community, so.
No, I didn't get negative feedback by it because you have to have a plan. Meaning, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to give back 5% of, let's just say it's $1 million that the agency has acquired over a year's time. So there's $50,000. So I'm going to turn back, I'm going to flip back over into the organization that 5% of that $50,000. But what are you going to put it towards? So I could take $50,000 and put it towards, oh, I don't know, come up with something that's irregular or irresponsible. But my intentions, whereas I feel that I differentiate between my candidates, is that I have a particular plan or a strategy as to where I'm going to be putting that money back into. And those are my 4 goals that I have addressed and I've made very well known to the communities. And that, if done properly with that 5%, I think that's reasonable, and that's also an ethical decision that should be made by the county executive or the sheriff.
So Lieutenant Howard, if you're elected, you would put that 5% back into the the department's fund and
Correct.
use it for equipment or any other needs that
Well,
may come
I mean,
along?
it takes your money to make money. So you're going to have to put that money and invest it back into your department. You're going to have to invest in your general and in your officers' training. You're going to have to invest in their equipment to make sure that they have what they need to be out there. Sometimes we're, depending on where we're patrolling, we're 15, 20 minutes before we have backup. So having the proper equipment to deal with things, also the training is a big essential part, and that will play a big part in putting that back in and creating a better officer and a better community.
Yes, but may I?
Oh, sure.
And I want to go one step further than what Joel has mentioned, but in order to charge for a particular service, because that's what the Sheriff's Department does, it has to be viewed as being legitimate. It's kind of like if I'm selling this coffee mug for $5, but this coffee mug immediately falls apart the moment that it holds some liquid beverage, am I going to get $5 for that service? So are we taking that money and are we putting it into to enhance upon? Or are we doing what we can to build legitimacy for the Sheriff's Department so that people believe in us, so that there's trust for the organization? Those are 2 different conversations that we should probably have.
And I'd like to add that negative feedback did not come from registered voters. It came from people from other counties and saying that if I was elected sheriff at that round table sheriff's meeting, I would be in the back corner for giving up that 5%.
Okay, interesting. Well, I wanted to ask, drill down a little bit here. The specific job of the sheriff, is it mainly just to oversee the department and assign officers to various places and negotiate contracts with various entities that approach the department? And I guess the other question is, do you guys sort of go out and look for these contracts, or do you wait for the phone to ring and say, hey, we needed traffic control for the next week because we're doing a construction project here? What exactly, and maybe Lieutenant Howard, I'll throw this to you first, what exactly does the sheriff do in terms of his role?
So the sheriff actually does engage, go out and seek the contracts, talk with the people about that. Constantly, we're constantly hiring people, part-time positions, and when a full-time position is available, we select from the officers that we have on board. Or if the right candidate comes along, we hire from the outside. But yeah, the sheriff's got to be engaged in it. He's the only one that can make those decisions.
Okay. Well, I guess I just wanted to ask one other question, kind of connected to that. Is it your view of all three of you here that the sheriff should be physically present in the county most of the time? I mean, in order to carry out those jobs, and of course I ask that in the context there's been discussion, allegations made that the current sheriff was spending not the typical amount of time one was expected to be either in the office or in the county or on location. And I guess if any one of the three of you is elected, do you feel that being physically present in the county at least is a prerequisite to the job? Mr. Alexander, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I know I touched on this a little bit ago, but yes, I do. I think, I mean, obviously people need their personal time with their family, you know, vacations and stuff like that, but the majority of the time being an elected official, you should be available to the people in the community. If not right available, at least by phone call, email, you're responding within 24 hours to the people that have questions or concerns or whatever they have going on.
Mr. Gully?
Well, here we are again with the conversation of legitimacy. And legitimacy is a collaboration of many different things, such as transparency, accountability, collaboration, and trust that you have to form with your people. And a sheriff is a leader, not only of the organization, but it's also a leader within the community. And with that being said, as we've discussed, and as I've discussed many times, the sheriff has to be present. You cannot lead from afar. Now, I know this firsthand because I'm also an educator, and teaching remotely was extremely difficult. And I saw that students really regressed when COVID hit, and it was extremely difficult to bring them back to where I felt that they were most proficient. So with that being said, and that's also another reason as to why I ran in 2018 too, Andrew, is that I could see circumstances that were pending that I felt that needed to be addressed. And I know that Bo and I have had this conversation as well. Whereas, one, we felt it was necessary to put ourselves out there, to be vulnerable in a way, to explain to the people professionally what we saw and how we felt it was necessary to change it. And again, here I sit in 2022 because I see those same warning signs. I see the same bell going off that, one, I was ignored, or we were in 2018, but now it's still present and it's gotten worse.
Okay. Lieutenant Howard, the sheriff should be physically present, I assume, in your opinion, and that's how you would conduct your job there.
Yes, I believe he should be physically present, and but not only in the community. He also has other responsibilities outside of the county, as far as meetings with the governor, the Sheriff's Association meetings that are not always held in Bennington County. He has other responsibilities outside of the community as well, or outside of the county. But yes, being physically present in the community and in the county and available for your guys, yeah, absolutely.
And I see you felt that Sheriff Schmidt was always available to contact when you needed to reach him and everything.
If something was to arise when he was not in the office physically, yes, it was a phone call or an email away, and he would usually respond within half an hour.
Okay, all right. Because I know that's been
See,
been a question out there.
I would disagree because I've talked to some certain staff within the organization, and they've told me that that's not the case. Now, I'm not going to sit here and get into an argument with Joel, nor with Bo regarding this conversation, but again, these are the warning bells that I just spoke of that, again, need to be significantly addressed.
As well as I don't want to go tit for tat, but I don't agree with that statement.
Okay. Well, all right. Moving on. One of the issues in law enforcement has been recruitment of new officers. It seems like police departments all across the country, as well as those here in Vermont, state police, seem to be having a tremendous difficulty, or I keep hearing anyway, that they're having a lot of trouble recruiting new officers. Has been your sense that, and again, I guess Lieutenant Howard, I'll go to you on this one since you've been kind of on the front lines of this, at least locally here. Has it been hard to find new officers that are qualified and get them trained up and in uniform?
It's slowed down a little bit, but we're always receiving applications. People passing the backgrounds have been accepted. We have a couple new officers coming out. Actually, one of them's out on FTO now, and I think we just hired another full-time officer that's fully certified. And yeah, we're not having a real hard time. It's just not a lot of people want to get into it, but we're constantly recruiting people.
Okay. And before we move on from that, any feelings of the rest of you? I mean, one of the other questions has come was this qualified immunity issue that would be a disincentive to recruit officers. I guess I just wondered, what are your feelings about that? Is that argument solid, that qualified immunity or eliminated qualified immunity?
I don't want to interrupt Bo because I think he had something to say.
Yeah, I was going to touch
okay.
in on what Joel said, but just from my time working here with probation and parole, I have a lot of friends that work for different agencies and law enforcement, and a lot of them they're tired. They want to go, and I have a handful of them that, if elected, that want to come on board with me, that I know that are great officers that I've worked with in the past.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
See, now as a licensed educator and having the honor of working with high school students from freshman to senior, I have to turn students away within my program because I can only have 16 students. And the law enforcement profession itself is still an honorable and a much sought after trait. And with that being said, is that if or when elected sheriff, that I have a pool of students that I have personally trained. I know that they meet my standards, and I know that they would meet the standards of the community, who would actually perform very well. And with that being said, we test their skills and their skill sets, particularly at Skills USA, which is a competition that's held both in-state and nationally. And in-state, for the last 6 years, our program at Southwest Technical Law Enforcement has won gold in criminal justice and in crime scene investigation. So these young men and women are extremely talented. And especially, I head the state competition, so I put that together. I work with Lieutenant Mosier up at the Vermont Police Academy on the state police side, as well as the Major Crimes Unit. But since then, for this year, and I have to kind of tip my hat for my team here, is that the CSI, or my crime scene investigation team, they won 3rd in the nation. So they're nationally ranked, and they're sought after. So, and that's why in my plan, or in part of my strategic plan, it is essential that we work with Southwest Tech and other educational entities to groom these students from the very beginning to where we need them to be at the end. And if that shall be the sheriff's agency or other local municipalities or the state police, then I will do that.
Okay. And my question on qualified immunity, Bo, I'll throw it to you first. Do you feel that that's going to be a problem?
I hear a lot about it. I hear a lot of officers are worried about it. We'll have to see what happens, and instead of beating a dead horse, how far it goes. But it's definitely something that we all need to be watching for and thinking about.
And I should have probably prefaced that question by just saying qualified immunity is a doctrine that I believe the Supreme Court came up with that protects government officials, like select board members, for instance, as well as police officers, yes, from being prosecuted for civil offenses while on duty. Okay, before we have to run here, I just had a couple of other questions that kind of maybe grow more out of sort of current event type stuff than anything. How long does it take for an officer to be trained? Let's say someone comes to the department and says, hey, I want to be a police officer and work with the county sheriffs. Is it months of training or weeks? What happens?
Well, it depends on whether they're full-time or part-time, honestly. The part-time is a 2-week class at the academy, and then after that they have to come back and do a core of required classes, and then go through the FTO process in order to be certified to be out on their own. A full-time police officer takes 16 to 22 weeks, depending on the courses depending on the career goal which they want to have. For instance, your basic academy is 16 weeks, and then you have your specialty classes there afterwards for certain different qualifications and other training aspects. So 16 to 22 weeks is about the basic.
Okay, interesting.
But, but that's your most prefatory. That's your entry level.
Okay,
So, in order to get as I've understood it, it takes approximately, in order to get a very well trained, very well seasoned law enforcement officer, it's approximately 5 years for them to see, to experience, to handle, to cooperate with or collaborate with other agencies. It takes approximately 5 years to get a very well seasoned, very, very educated officer, deputy, trooper, and so on. But I know that Joel had mentioned the approximate time to train for a level 3 certificate, which is your full-time, and level 2, which is your part-time. But that's at your most prefatory, at your most beginning phase. And I was confused by your question. Is that what you were asking for? Is the
Yeah.
most okay, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
no, that's fine, yeah. Bo, let me turn to you. Deadly force, that's been another major question of policing across the country. What is the guideline, or what do you think should be the guideline for the use of deadly force by an officer, by taking out a weapon and shooting back at someone?
So standard for me and standard around the board is, use match or less than. And working in corrections where you're not armed with a gun, working for probation and parole where you don't have a sidearm, and being the head of security at the hospital where you don't have the sidearm, and you really rely on your level of de-escalation verbally before it gets to that level. So from all my years in doing that, I think that's really important, because when you can just go strictly to a weapon to kind of control a situation, as opposed to talking and de-escalating and bringing somebody down to a reasonable level in a behavior continuum, it's helpful and it's more beneficial to everybody's safety, not just the officer, not just the individual, but people in the community.
Would the rest of you agree with that as well?
You want me to go first? You want me to
Go
go
ahead.
So, as I explained, and as we in law enforcement clearly understand, that there comes a moment where de-escalation, no matter how properly performed, just doesn't work. And there are times where you have to use force. And to answer your question pertaining to using deadly force, if an officer, looking at the totality of the circumstances in front of them, and to break it down so everybody out there understands, the facts that are immediately being analyzed by that officer at that given moment, feels that there's an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, that's when an officer has the ability to use deadly force. However, we're taught kind of like ability, so there must be a present ability for that suspect to commit that deadly force and or serious bodily injury, not only to the officer, but to somebody else in the community. The opportunity must be present and the intent must be there. So that criteria, I could go into U.S. Supreme Court. We could talk about Tennessee v. Gardner. We can talk about the Connor or the Connor v. Graham, or the Graham factors. Is force considered reasonable, and how is it considered reasonable? Because you can't look back, hindsight being 20/20. Mm-hmm. You have to look in that immediate moment. Okay, and again, the majority of the public probably doesn't understand that. And for those that are law enforcement that are watching this program, they certainly do. However, it's our responsibility to educate the people. And I really think that we could be doing a better job with that, Andrew.
Okay.
And would you say that the de-escalation part is a vital part of that?
De-escalation by all means is a priority.
Yes.
I mean,
and a lot of officers are hesitating today to go to that next level of force, which also creates a dangerous situation for them and everybody involved.
As I explain it to people, students up to the elderly in our communities, think about, metaphorically, you're holding an umbrella, okay? And you're in a storm. I know this may sound odd, but just bear with me. And the rain that's falling on you is considered litigation, lawsuits. People are always trying to sue law enforcement officers. There's no doubt about that. However, what I explain to my students and I explain to people out there is that if you are acting professionally within the realm of the law, do your job, do it well. And those constitutional, court cases or case law and or the laws that have been established, those will protect you. That's the umbrella. And to go back to your question, qualified immunity, that's a protection for us. Because the moment you strike that, Andrew, as I noted in your wonderful TV show with Colonel Baker, and he described that once you strike qualified immunity, what are the standards for us? So if we say, for instance, stop, halt, and if we have probable cause to make the arrest, the person outright says, no, I don't want to go with you. And no matter how we attempt to de-escalate, we still have to grab hold of the individual. Let's just say in that tussle, the person falls and gets hurt. Now, without qualified immunity protecting us, what does that mean for us? Again, there is no standard. So that's a major concern for me. And I really admire the way that Colonel Baker explained that to the viewers on your show.
Yeah, that was an interesting discussion we had. Before we move on, Lieutenant Howard, I just want to make sure I gave you an opportunity to respond to the deadly force question.
Deadly force, obviously, I think James did a great job of explaining that, and I think a lot of the training will come into play there. And there's no law enforcement officer, there's no person out there that wants to go out and have to take someone's life.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we have to live with that as well. But that's a last resort. I mean, we've exhausted all our measures, and we are in imminent fear that someone else is going to die, or we are going to die at that point.
Right. Well, another question that I think has come up is the use of body cameras. Do you guys currently wear body cameras when you're out on patrol?
I do.
Is it required? Is it just sort of an individual decision?
Would you want me to start?
Sure. It's already begun.
So if we go back and we look at the death of George Floyd, which was March of 2020,
May
approximately.
25th.
Okay.
May 20th, yeah.
May 20th.
May 20th.
Okay. So if we go back and look at that, there was, well beforehand, and including that horrific circumstance, that there has been a lot of outcry for reform. Okay? Now, to go back in time, before body cameras were really a request, there were a handful of us in Bennington Police that wore them, and I was one of them. So we knew and we could see the importance of a body camera. Not only does it offer accurate transparency, it also offers the ability for law enforcement officers, administration to review, randomly pick a body camera footage and review and critique that. Are they acting properly? Are they meeting departmental policy and procedure? And so on. Whereas currently, laws were put in place to have body cameras established by January 1st of this year. There was discussion where certain agencies could not afford them, or it was a financial burden. And I would like to argue and hear what their opinions are in regards to the financials are there. Meaning, I know for a fact the JAG grant is a federal grant, and they have been funding body cameras for small law enforcement, sheriff's departments, etc., tribal police across the country. So it is possible. Number two, when I take over as sheriff, I will be seeking out body cameras. My staff will wear body cameras because they have a right to be protected, and the citizens have that same right to be protected. Now let's go one step further. So now you have video. Okay? So we all know that video is used in court. Okay? Now I'm going one step deeper that we haven't quite discussed. We have security camera that's offered against us in court per se. We have a cell phone camera that's offered against us or for us in court. Now we have body camera. Okay, who's going to determine if that video has been tampered with? If the sound, for instance, if the gunshot goes off, that it hasn't been modified, because people can do that. So not only am I looking at also establishing body cameras within the organization, because the state's already created the policy. The other is that I'm also currently in the works of speaking with the executive directors across our county of establishing a video forensic analysis, meaning having an individual who could be on phone dial when a critical incident happens, where they can come and review said videos, including our body camera, so that it can be used in court.
Interesting. What do both of you gentlemen think about body cameras? Or do we, and Lieutenant Howard, let me go to you first, and then Bo. Do they currently, our officers while they're on patrol or on duty, required to wear them?
So right now we do not have actual body cameras. We have microphones and in-car cameras that are capable of doing panoramic and single stage and/or if we have someone in transport. But I have already been working with a representative from Axon to get body cameras along with tasers, and one of the features that they offer is if we're in a situation and a weapon is drawn, either a pistol or a taser, it'll activate everybody's body camera within that area so that all body cameras will be on. So that you won't have to worry about just one person having to remember to set it. The minute you break your holster, it'll be activated. They're not cheap, but I think the officers have the right to be defended with that camera as well as the public. It can only make a better person out of it because there's no way to cover up that.
Okay. Bo, any thoughts on that one?
I agree, they are very important to have. But and the management part is where it comes in. Who's going to be responsible for reviewing these, and how transparent is it going to be to the public? How easy will it be able for them to obtain it, whether good or bad for the department, or good or bad for the individual that was in a situation with the law enforcement officer? So I think it's important, hands down. But there needs to be full transparency when it comes to it, and there needs to be an auditing system for those cameras. That is somebody who does not work for the sheriff.
Okay. Well, we have time for, I think, for one last question, and I just wanted to touch upon something I think came up really early in our conversation. You all said how the department might be run more transparently, and well, let's see. We'll go around the table. I guess again in alphabetical order to close things out. Bo, if you're elected, first of all, I guess the question would be, do you feel there's a need for more transparency? And if so, what might be some of the elements in that?
There is definitely a need for more transparency across the board, not just for the sheriff's department. I feel that with somebody of, with the voice as sheriff, that can't go ignored, and the policies and procedures that the sheriff sets forward will open up other agencies to do the same, because they would almost be forced to do so. We have a lot of things that are required for public record, like records for the sheriff's department that I obtained in 2018. There's still information that I still don't know, because a lot of some of the information wasn't there. Not that it was redacted, it just wasn't there, and it wasn't available to me. So I feel like there should be, what I'm going to do if elected sheriff, I'm going to have quarterly community meetings and the complete goings-ons of what's happening with the sheriff's department, with the community, what we can do, because I can't fix everything as sheriff, and it's going to take a collaborative effort, not just with the community, but the elite few in our community.
Okay. And Mr. Gully, does the department need more transparency, or are we good as we are?
You know, in September, I took a graduate level course, which was it was an advanced leadership course through Norwich University. And there was a lot of conversation about transparency in organizations, profit, nonprofit, public organizations. And what it really boiled down to was transparency, if properly defined, and how it was explained to me, is the sharing of both good and bad information. And with that being said, there are many ways that you can be transparent, such as, in my plan, creating a citizens advisory board is one. To offer a diverse staff, including bilingual, bicultural individuals. Also, being able to, well, being believed when sharing that information, Andrew, because right now, I mean, let's look at our kind of like the partisan politics of our national government today. Whereas some people will adamantly stand up and say, I believe President Biden, and there are those that adamantly say, no matter what he says, I don't believe him. And currently, right now, I think that lack of respect and or lack of collectiveness in the respect for the agency has significantly reduced due to the circumstances that have been brought on by Sheriff Schmidt. So it would be long-winded of me to articulate all of the transparencies that I would like to bring into the organization, and I would encourage people to go to my Facebook page as well as my website and or my YouTube page, and I go into great detail on how I will bring forth transparency within the organization.
Okay, Lieutenant Howard, you got the last word.
All right. The transparency, yes, but there's many aspects of transparency. We have an open door policy at the department, so you can come in and talk to any officer at any time as long as they're on duty. The department could be more transparent. I mean, people don't understand what we do. We could put out more press releases. We could have a more public image. We are more of a community-based policing at this point that doesn't share the information as well as it should be. As far as financially, we're only required to audit once every year, 3 years. We do it every year, and we've never had a problem.
2 years every year.
We do it every year, and we don't have any problem. And as far as transparency, yeah, I think that transparency is important, but there's many aspects of that that people don't understand.
Okay. Well, we'll have to leave it there for today. Voters, I'm sure, will I think, find our conversation today very interesting and informative, and I guess there's plenty of other ways that they can go to find out more about whose name they ought to check the box off next to. But I want to thank all three of you for making the time for this conversation today to really helpfully inform our viewers about the very important job that the county sheriff does, and one I think that has kind of been, kind of a little unclear to many people for far too long. But anyway, I want to thank all of you for being with us as well. I really hope you found our program interesting. And again, my thanks to Lieutenant Joel Howard, James Gully Jr., and Bo Alexander, the three candidates who are running for the Bennington County Sheriff's Department in the August 9th Democratic Party primary. You'll have a chance to vote for one of them at that point, and of course early voting is already underway, so you can run out to your town clerk and do it right now if you want to. Anyway, thanks again for being with us. Hope you found it interesting and informative, and we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, have a great day.